It's awesome to have our young people lead our worship service this morning. How grateful we are to them. And they did a terrific job, and I know you're all appreciative. I want to welcome you today to our service at the Garden City Church of the Brethren. We especially want to welcome those, not only those of you who are here in the sanctuary, but those who are joining us online. We've been this is the middle of a 5-part sermon series called Standing Firm, Stand Firm. And each week we've been trying to answer this very relevant question for us living in 2024. And here's the question. You have it in your outline. How to live and love well in a compromising culture. How to live and love well in a compromising culture. God has given us a handbook on how to do these things. It's called the Book of Daniel. We're going to be in the middle of the first 6 chapters. Today we're going to be in chapter 3. If you want to turn there, we'll be there in just a moment or two. It's the story of 4 teenagers who are kidnapped and taken as POWs to Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq. They're given a full-ride scholarship to the University of Babylonian Studies with a minor in pagan and debauchery living. They did it to brainwash them. They wanted them to believe like Babylonians believe and think and live like Babylonians think and live. So today we drop into chapter 3 of Daniel. As you have been gathered these last couple of weeks, we've been talking about how these godly men have been filled with all sorts of ungodly thoughts and lifestyle. But with their tenacity and their faith, they rise above all of the garbage to become people who are making a difference in their new home. As we learned last week, we do it, they did it, and we are to do it with tact and wisdom, not with obnoxiousness. And I believe that this 3rd chapter will be food for your soul and strength for your faith. Now, you need to know that the Babylonian culture is driven by the flesh, but these young men are driven by the Spirit of God. They were taken from godly parents and godly schools in a godly culture in a godly nation, and now they find themselves in a place of total confusion and compromise. I think especially for the young people in our audience today, I think that God has given us the book of Daniel especially for you, because it will teach you how to navigate the treacherous world you face and are going to face. The book of Daniel reminds us we are to be in the world, but not of the world. Instead of trying to fit in, we are supposed to stand out. Now, when we left off last week, the evil King Nebuchadnezzar was having these crazy psychedelic dreams. And he asked everybody to interpret them, and nobody could. Actually, he asked them to tell him what the dream was, and then to give an interpretation. And Daniel is the one who had the dream revealed to him. And you remember it was about a statue. And can we have the statue up? There we are. So every different part of the body represents a different empire, and it's a different type of metal. The head represents Babylonian Empire, and it's of gold. Then as you can see, there's a chest and arms, and that's of silver. And then the belly and thighs of bronze, that's the Greek Empire. And then the legs are of iron, and that's ancient Roman Empire. Then the feet of clay, and that's with this rock. Each one, he told the king. Now, it represents that every one of these empires are going to fail, but the rock at the bottom is going to live forever. You remember who that rock was. That rock was Jesus. And his kingdom is the church, and it cannot be destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar thanks Daniel for his interpretation, and he gives him a big promotion and makes him the second most important person in the entire empire. So what do you think Nebuchadnezzar's going to do next? Well, let's pick it up in chapter 3. We're going to go now, not literally verse by verse, but pretty close to it. Let's look at the first two verses. Chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So Daniel's just told him the statue represents his kingdom and that others are going to fail. The next thing he does, he builds a huge, giant statue. You see, Nebuchadnezzar's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He builds it of gold. It's all about him, and that's how he looks at it. And then in verse 2, we pick it up. Then he sent messengers to the high officers. He sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. He invites everyone that's on his payroll. He invites them all to the ribbon cutting ceremony for this wonderful giant statue. Since Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are all on the payroll, they get invited too. Let's continue on. Daniel 3, verses 4 to 6. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations, languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither," I don't know what a zither is. Maybe we could start a band with zithers. I'm not sure. I know what a lyre is. They're running for office. Anyway, excuse me. I'm on a roll. I don't even want to talk about harps. I don't even want to talk about anybody harping on something. Harps, pipes, and other musical instruments. Bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will be immediately thrown into the blazing furnace. I highlighted that blazing furnace. Things go from 0 to 60 that fast. If you don't bow down, you're going in the fire. You're going in the fire. If you don't worship this statue, you're going to go in the fire. So that brings us to the first point. Here's the question. Is the fire inside you greater than the furnace in front of you? Is the fire inside of you greater than the furnace in front of you? Because I'm going to be telling you, there are going to be days that you need to know what's burning inside you and that it's greater than the enemy can throw at you. The fire inside you is greater than any heat Satan can throw at you. In this cultural moment, you will probably never be called to bow down to worship an idol, but will likely be called to bow down to an ideology, to a way of thinking. So what are our idols today? And I have a thing. Idol equals ideology. What our culture says, they say to embrace these ideologies or you will be canceled. Be compliant or you will be criticized. Be quiet or you'll be ridiculed. We're not going to throw you into a literal furnace, but we will cancel you and throw you out of school or throw you out of the school board meeting. We will remove your books from Amazon or pull your videos from YouTube. Now, I don't know why. I have no idea why. But a couple of weeks ago, a young man in our church was baptized. He put the video on Facebook, and the next day, it was removed. Really. Marco said to me, I don't understand it. They removed my video. By the way, the good news is Jesus was also ridiculed, was criticized, canceled, and nailed to a cross. But even death itself could not put out the fire that was inside him. All right, number 2. What does it take to have a fire before you greater than the furnace in front of you? What does it take to have a fire in front of you greater than the furnace in front of you? A. I know it's a lot to write, so I'm going to let you catch up here. A. Here's the first thing you need. You need a conviction greater than the culture of compromise. You need a conviction greater than the culture of compromise. We're going to see in the next few verses that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had a conviction that was greater than their culture of compromise. The king gives the ultimatum. We pick it up in verses 8, reading down through 11. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said, King Nebuchadnezzar, long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing fire. These sorcerers are the same ones who could not interpret the dream. Now they inform on the Jews. And these young men have 3 choices. You have 3 choices. First of all, they can become confrontational. That's often what we do. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, you think the fire in your furnace is hot? Just wait till you see the fire that you're going to face in hell. That's where some of us might want to go. Or you might choose to be compliant and say, well, we don't want to make a scene, so we're going to go ahead and bow down to your statue, but we're not bowing down in our hearts. Because if we die, how is God's word going to get out? Or the third, they could do the courageous thing and stand in their convictions. And with wisdom and tact, they shared their conviction because they believed their conviction was greater than the culture of compromise, which is, of course, exactly what they did. So these astrologers tattletale on them. We pick it up now in verses 12 to 15. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is this true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. Thank God we didn't have the whole list. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing fire. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? He asked them individually to go on the record. Is this true? Have you ever been in a scenario where the world around you is saying to you, if you don't do this, then we're going to make your life difficult. If you don't go with our business decision, we're going to make your business difficult. I'm going to make your relationships difficult. I'm going to make your faith difficult if you don't bow down about this. The enemy always wants you to bow down. Why? Because the one-time angel Lucifer saw the worship and honor that the angels gave to God in heaven, and ever since, he wants you to worship him. So when the enemy starts messing with your marriage or starts messing with your kids, you have to have a conviction that says, no, we are not compromising here. You're not going to get the remote of what I think about. You don't control the remote of my attitude and my mindset. God is in me and he is in control. Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. You see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had a conviction. And gang, we need to have that same conviction today. Not going to be obnoxious about it. We don't have to be a jerk about it. But we don't have to bow down, and we won't compromise. Because right now we have a generation living in confusion. And it takes people of conviction to lovingly lead them through their confusion. If you fear the furnace, whatever that is for you, and you allow that fear in your heart, you will begin to give in to the fear because you would rather compromise than be in that furnace. They had a conviction that said, I won't back down. I won't bow down. Never. Never. All right, verse 16 to 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never, ever serve your gods or worship your golden statue that you have set up. I love this. God can do this. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to worship you. God can cure my cancer, but even if he doesn't, I'm still going to worship him. God can heal my marriage, but even if he doesn't, I'm still going to worship him. God can change my financial situation or my addictions issues, but even if he doesn't, I'm still going to worship him. You see, it's showdown time. And we are never going to bow down and worship your statue. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have said, God, are you really serious, God? Do you really want us to be thrown into this fire? They've already ripped us away from our family and our friends. They've taken us to this godless country, and now you're asking us to just go burn up in a furnace? God, do you really think that? And as some famous person would say, come on, man. Can you hear us saying that to God? God, would you really have me go through that? But their conviction is greater than the furnace before them. It's greater than the culture of compromise. And they say to Nebuchadnezzar, we have a God who can save us. But even if he doesn't, we won't compromise. And that's a game changer. All right, B. It creates a confidence to stand. It creates a confidence to stand. I want you to know that all three of these men, young men, we're not talking old men, these are young men. We talked about it last week that they were probably 17, 18 years old. So we pick it up in verse 19 and 20. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became, I love the picture, distorted with rage. He goes absolutely ballistic. We're talking like Jack Nicholson in The Shining kind of crazy. That's how crazy he's getting. Then we pick it up the second half of 19 and then verse 20. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. Verse 22. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. Have you ever been in a campfire and you were so close to the campfire and you realize how hot it was, you back away? That's the kind of hot we're talking here, only magnified probably 7, 8, 10 times. Verse 24 to 26. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumps up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men unbound walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Now, I want to tell you, many scholars believe that this is the actual first appearance of Jesus in the Bible. Chapter 2, it was the rock that is attributed to Jesus, and now he is the 4th man in the furnace. Then verse 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God." Notice how his tone changes. "Servants of the Most High God, come out, come out." I want you to imagine the scene at that fire. You talk about an entrance when those men walked out of that fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar does a complete 180 turnaround in his perspective. Verse 28 to 30. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise," listen to this. This is a guy who's worshiped pagan gods all his life. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angels to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." You see, they had a confidence to stand. They had a conviction greater than the culture of compromise. Listen, when God shows up in your fire, the world will look at you and God will be glorified by you. They will say, "Praise God to the Lord, for Billy has been set free from his addiction. He's never going back. Praise God to the Lord of Samantha, who stood by her husband when she didn't need to. God healed their marriage." So what happened? What does Nebuchadnezzar do now? He absolutely does what you couldn't imagine. He makes a declaration. Pick it up, verse 29. "Therefore I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be burned, turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this." just a few minutes ago, he was using the furnace to demote them. Now he takes them out and he lifts them up. And then the chapter finishes in verse 30 with these words. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Listen, you can stand in confidence because even if you have a furnace in front of you, you're never standing alone because God is with you. God will always be with you in that furnace. What the enemy will use for evil, God will use for good. That's why in Hebrews 10:35 it says, "So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded." So I have an Apple Watch. Some of you have an Apple Watch like this. And every once in a while, when I least expect it, it buzzes. And I look at it, and even though I wasn't expecting a message, here's what it will say. Time to stand. Stand up and move a little bit for a minute. I should also add, when I do stand up and walk around for a minute, the next message will say, "You did it, you did it." I walk around the house, my wife said, "What are you doing?" "I did it." I know some of you may have the watch, you know what I'm talking about. Now these days we are asked to stand up for a lot of things. Some are good, some are bad. You're going to see, I love, one of the things I love about Major League Baseball is they ask people to stand up for cancer. And you'll see that in the World Series. You'll see people, even the players, the umpires, everybody standing up, holding a sign to stand up for cancer. But sometimes they're not so good. I'm reminded of the teacher that had just completed a specialized course in psychology. And she decided to use it on her 4th grade class. She got the class quiet and asked if anyone in the class thought that they were stupid. She said, "If you are, you think, then you should stand up." After a long silence, finally Larry stood up. She said, "Larry, do you think you're stupid?" He said, "No, ma'am. It's just that I didn't want you to stand up here all alone." No, that's not a true story. But you can say to yourself, "But Lord, nobody else is standing up. Why do I need to stand up?" I want to tell you, folks, it's time to stand up. It's time to stand up and speak the truth and speak it in love. It's time to stand up and live and love well in a compromising culture. It's time to stand up and pray and fight for your family. Maybe when your Apple Watch says it's time to stand, you will remember this message to stand up for God. And maybe ask him, "Okay, God, what do I need to stand up for today? What do I need to stand for in the gap? Who do I need to stand in the gap for today?" My watch thinks that if I stand up every time it tells me to stand up, it will make me healthier. Just how much more spiritually healthy would I be if every time it said stand up, I thought about somebody that I needed to stand up for? When the world says, "If you don't bow down, I'll put you in the furnace," you need to say, "I don't care. I'm going to stand up for Jesus." When they say, "If you don't say what I want you to say, I'm not going to be your friend," well, I'm going to miss your friendship, but it's time to stand. If you don't do what I'm telling you to do in this business deal right now, it's not going to go well for you in the future in this company. I don't care. It's time to stand. It's time to stand in the confidence of God. It's time to stand in the arms of God. It's time to stand on the truth of God. Like Esther, like these 3 young Hebrew boys, we will say, even if I perish, even if I perish, but I'm going to stand. And that's my conclusion. It's time to stand up. It's time to stand up. And I challenge us, we live in very compromising times. We have an election coming up in less than 3 weeks, and the anger out there and the tension out there is at a level I can't even begin to comprehend. And Christians need to stand up for Jesus Christ.